This video is sponsored by Displate. Displate makes metal posters that hang on your wall with the power of magnetism, so you can easily move them around or put up new ones whenever you like. They have a huge range of game stuff, including stuff for games like Destiny and The Division, so click the link in the description below to find out more, and with that, on with the video.
Alright, here we go. My first PvP match in The Division 2. This is going to be exciting. Alright, we're back in now. It's all good. No problem. Let's just focus up. Here we go. Get the grenade ready. Throw it out there. Yep, here we go. Fuck!
The Division went on an incredible journey over its 3-year existence. It launched in spectacularly bad fashion, rife with bugs, exploits, hacking, and a truly broken gear system that was just terrible. There was almost no gear dropping, very few ways to obtain that gear, and most of it was broken overpowered. And the PvP, wow, don't even get me started on how bad PvP was. Post-release, The Division went on to change almost every part of itself, culminating in the 1.8 patch, at which point the internet seemed to proclaim universally that yes, The Division was now a good game and it was okay to like it. But despite this, at no point during the entire journey was the game ever fixed. At no point were all the bugs squashed, and you could reliably play The Division knowing that you wouldn't encounter graphical errors, that you wouldn't face network issues, that your skills would always work, that your animations wouldn't glitch out, or that you wouldn't encounter hackers in the DZ. It got better, but it never got fixed, and as I approached The Division 2's beta, I really had two questions. Number one, does the game look like an improvement over the first one, with enough new ideas and content to make it a compelling purchase? And two, is the game fixed? On the first point, I have to say that I'm actually extremely impressed by how much is changed or new in The Division 2, and all of these changes or additions seem like the right steps. If you're looking at this footage and you're thinking, this looks like the same old shit, I really do get that, but I think if you stick around for the body of this video, I'll be able to show you just how much has been changed and why I think that the game might have something to offer someone who played the previous game at launch and decided it wasn't for them. As for the second point about the game being fixed, I sadly have to report that from what I've seen during the beta, the answer is a resounding no. I encountered every possible issue, from server issues, PC performance problems, animation glitches, audio glitches, enemy AI issues, and just a lot more, like a lot. For me, its performance was worse than Anthem's performance, but I will stress that this was my experience, and I've certainly heard from a lot of people that say their game ran fine and that they were impressed with the technical state. Either way, it's clear that with some 5 weeks out from launch, there's still a lot of work to be done here. Finally, and most concerning to me, I find Ubisoft Silence on in-game monetization to be rather deafening. We have absolutely no idea how The Division 2 will be monetized, and Ubisoft has not ruled out a whole bunch of stuff that BioWare has already ruled out for Anthem. Things like exclusive paid cosmetics or loot boxes. Ubisoft has been incorporating more and more monetization into its games of late, with the previous Division having both loot boxes and exclusive paid cosmetics. It's a fair bet to assume that this stuff will return in The Division 2, but we don't know that. Much like Anthem, I'm very excited for The Division 2, but it's already feeling like people should wait for the launch window to iron out bugs and to answer outstanding questions before they lay down their hard-earned cash. These large-scale, ambitious, live service games rarely launch smoothly, and from what I've seen of The Division 2, it's looking like it will follow the same pattern. I'm seeing a lot of commentary around The Division 2 that it's essentially just The Division 1.5, and I absolutely get why. It's built on the same engine, it looks very similar, and it's reusing a lot of the design elements, so surely this has to be a glorified DLC, right? Well, it's really not. Unlike Destiny 2, which removed huge numbers of features and took massive steps back for the franchise, The Division 2 isn't really removing anything at all. And with regards to moving the franchise forward, I would go as far as to say that there isn't a single weapon, skill, talent, or mechanic that hasn't been altered from the previous game. I'm really not exaggerating. I was actually quite surprised when I could see just how much this game has evolved. The first thing you'll notice is the setting and the visual palette. Where The Division 1 was set in New York in the wintertime, we're now in Washington DC in the summertime. Everything is brighter, it's clearer, and the detail really leaps out at you more distinctly. The Division 1 was already a gorgeous game, but here it's like they've taken the Vaseline off the lens, they've turned on all the lights, and they've upped the contrast. You will absolutely find yourself just stopping to take it all in at certain points, as moments of sunlit decay prove too arresting to simply run past. The map you're exploring doesn't feel appreciably bigger than the first game, but it's definitely more dense, with each segment having more enemy NPCs, more public events going on, public executions for you to stop, or conflict zones that you need to capture or defend. There are friendly NPCs you can call in for help. There's a lot going on, and like the first game, I very much enjoyed just walking the streets to see what's going down at any given street corner. In terms of your overall objective while you're playing, it's probably best summarized as make the base of operations go. You head into the open world to find and help settlements. There are specific NPCs at each of these, and you need to help them by completing quests, after which point they'll agree to come back to the base of operations and help you with stuff. The settlements thing is a nice touch. Each of them is a mini colony, and you help build them up by completing missions for them and donating supplies. It's actually a system that draws on a number of disparate game systems, like collecting resources in the open world, or participating in public events, or completing side missions. And it is a satisfying feeling when you finally put a roof on the place, or you're able to open a games corner for the kids. As for the missions, yeah, they're solid. Main missions are similar to what we've seen before, but improvements to the core combat loop make them more enjoyable, but we'll come back to that later. The side missions are way better. In the Division 1, the side missions were basically just garbage, just repetitive, uninteresting filler. Side missions here are lengthy, detailed, and challenging. They feel like mini main missions, rather than feeling like open world public events, which is very much what they felt like in the first game. Rather disappointingly, it seems as though the story in this game will continue to take a huge backseat. It's there, but it's environmental storytelling that comes through the various audio logs you find throughout the city. The cutscenes are just terrible. They're like intro cutscenes in a fighting game. In fact, most fighting games have much better cutscenes these days.
Sub-Zero? But you're dead.
I am not the Sub-Zero you speak of. He was my brother.
Destiny 2 Forsaken had a great story. Warframe has an incredible story. Anthem, it's too early to tell, but they're clearly taking a good swing at it. It's something they're trying for. The Division doesn't seem to even want to try to build something compelling, and I think that's a disappointment. Regardless, the developers have said that there's about a 40-hour campaign to go through in the full game, but they typically inflate that sort of stuff, so let's call it around 30 hours. Between open world exploration and events, main missions and side missions, and any other surprise content we might get along the way, I can see myself having a very enjoyable 30 hours if this is what they've built. And that's before we start talking about the many improvements to combat, itemization, gear, and enemy design. If you were to ask anyone that tried the first Division and didn't like it why they didn't like it, among their many lists of complaints is almost certainly going to be the word bullet sponge. As I've said before, bullet sponge enemies are part of any looter, but they feel particularly stupid in the Division because these sponges aren't giant armored aliens or tanks, they're some punk wearing a hoodie. It feels dumb to have to put so many bullets into enemies that look like this. If this is a deal breaker for you, then you are still not going to enjoy the Division 2. Enemies this time around are less bullet spongy in general because the game is actually deploying fewer enemies with the purple and yellow health bars. And when those enemies are purple or yellow, it's because they're wearing a specific piece of body armor, and if you can destroy that body armor, then you're suddenly going to be doing a lot more damage to that target. It's a nice touch that breaks down some of that cognitive dissonance, but yes, they're still bullet sponges, it's part of the genre. Weapons have received a complete overhaul. I've tried pretty much every weapon now, and they all feel just so great and useful, and this is a massive departure from the first game, where at least half of the weapons were utter garbage. Now, every weapon you pick up has a clear role, it sounds fantastic, it handles beautifully, and its stats are balanced in such a way as to make it useful. We will surely arrive at an agreed set of best-in-slot weapons at the endgame, but it's nice to know it will be because those weapons are good, rather than because every other weapon is just garbage. The combination of weapon and mod redesign, plus the changes to enemy health, results in a fundamentally different combat rhythm than what we had in the first game. The Division 1 was very much about using automatic weapons to dump as many bullets as possible into a target. The Division 2 feels much more snappy, much more pop and stop. It feels like a more fully realized version of the tactical combat promise implicit in the Tom Clancy name. The game also introduces end game class specialization. In the Division 1, your build was determined entirely by the gear you were wearing. Now, that's still still the case, only you can also select one of 3 endgame specialization weapons: a 50 caliber sniper, an explosive crossbow, or a grenade launcher. These weapons are sort of like your super ability in a game like Destiny or Anthem, and they put out a huge amount of damage and utility very quickly. But in addition to that, each of these specializations also changes the types of grenades you have access to and the way your healing ability functions. Added to all of this is a complete redesigned gear system that makes it much easier to mix and match gear set bonuses, and that completely gets rid of all of the useless stats that bloated gear in the previous game. If you stop to imagine the build diversity that's possible between your weapon choices, your mod choices, your gear set choices, your skills, your skill specs, your skill mods, and your class specialization, it's a pretty staggering level of flexibility that at this point looks like an improvement. But obviously we won't be able to definitively say this until we reach the endgame. Speaking of endgame, alright, so PvP in The Division 2, it's very different from The Division 1, both structurally and mechanically. Structurally, you have the choice of either the Dark Zone or match-made PvP matches. This is already a big departure from what most of you will remember from The Division 1, because it only added match-made PvP about a year after its launch. Before then, the Dark Zone was all people knew, and it was controversial. The DZ was a place where anyone could immediately shoot anybody else, where gangs of dozens of players would just roam around killing other players for the fun of it and abusing them over voice chat. It was a toxic environment by design, and that was its appeal to many players. They loved being in that uncompromising, no-holds-barred, raw, unfair PvP landscape. Over time, they took the edge off the Dark Zone, and what we have in The Division 2 is watered down further still. First of all stats are now normalized in the DZ and in match-made PvP. This buffs people's stats so the playing field is fair. There's no more getting stomped by someone just because they have better gear than you, though there is always going to be at least one Dark Zone area that has gear advantages enabled. Speaking of this, there's now 3 Dark Zone areas instead of just 1, and each zone has a max of 12 players instead of 24, making it easier for manhunt groups to survive. People who want to go rogue can't just immediately start shooting now either. They have to manually toggle it with an animation that takes a few seconds and warns nearby players so they have the ability to get ready for a fight. There's also new ways to go rogue, like stealing items from corpses or hacking SHD terminals, and these award you a different, lower stakes rogue status. And there's also no voice chat in the DZ anymore. That's gone. So as you can see, they've taken the edge off the DZ in a big way. It does sound like it's going to be a fairer and more competitive environment to be in, but I do wonder whether the DZ is about to face a sort of identity crisis. Without its more hardcore, raw elements, I wonder if the DZ will hold the same appeal that it once did to those who enjoyed the thrill of it. I never liked it myself, and I still don't like it here. I just don't enjoy killing people who don't want to be killed. It doesn't interest me in the slightest, but it interests a lot of other people, so we'll see what they have to say about all of this after launch. The mechanics of PvP have changed considerably as well, and it's here that I was most impressed. Movement in the game is now a lot slower, time to kill is much faster, a whole bunch of really broken skills and perks have been removed that could be relied upon to make you practically invulnerable if you use them at the right time. As a result, PvP feels slower, more deliberate, and more tactical. For the first time ever, cover is actually a requirement in the Division's PvP, where before everyone just ran around exploiting animation glitches and instant heals. I must say though that even with all of the changes to the DZ and with the slower, more tactical PvP, I still have no interest in PvP in the Division. I just don't like how it feels. I just cannot get past the third-person perspective. I'm really glad that it exists for other players to enjoy, but it hasn't converted me. The only PvP I ever enjoyed in the Division was the survival battle royale game mode, and until that makes a return, it's highly unlikely that I'll be doing any PvP in the Division. Okay, so technically this beta was a complete mess for me, and a mess for many other people. The most common issues were Delta errors, where I just get constantly disconnected every hour or so with no explanation. They did a server maintenance during the beta, and it fixed the problem for some people, but not for others. I also had this hilarious situation where like things just weren't registering for me at all. This is the footage here of me trying to pull the trigger, but nothing's happening. And then literally 2 minutes later, in a completely separate area of the Dark Zone, this happens.
Landmark engaged. Vital signs critical. Agent down.
Network stability has always been a problem throughout the entire life of the Division, so seeing this stuff already rearing its head, it is concerning. Optimization wise, it was also really bad. I run an RTX 2080 Ti and I couldn't get above 50 frames per second until I eventually found out that disabling the enable reduced input latency option actually doubled my frame rate. I could generally maintain around about 100 frames then, but it did dip a lot during high activity encounters. There was also an FPS degradation issue that forced me to restart my game on many occasions. Here is what it looked like before I did one of those restarts. Beyond graphics, there's a lot of broken shit in this game. Animations on ledges are very problematic, and I've had plenty of instances of this myself, and I've seen it elsewhere. I found a whole bunch of NPCs in T-poses. There were really, really bad audio glitches that I constantly suffered from. It sounded sort of like this. As you can hear, really terrible. Skills are also really, really clunky to use. A lot of them have activatable features that are very hard to target because of the way your camera is positioned. Like the turret, for example, is meant to place on top of the cover you're next to when you sort of quick deploy it, but most of the time it just places itself like on the floor next to you at your feet, which makes it completely useless. So then you need to manually target it, which is really annoying. And on top of all of this, I had multiple hard crashes to desktop for no apparent reason. There are already hacks that have been discovered in this game, which ironically are returning from the previous game. And one of the vice presidents of like Microsoft has also commented that he was seeing hacks, which is obviously not great. The UI is so bad, like whoa, it's so bad. I mean, it was bad in the first game, but it's like they've added more buttons this time around, and you now need to double click on all the menus in the PC version, which you never needed to do before, and it's such a mess. Like, it really does need a complete overhaul because it's a really, really, really bad UI at this point. On the console side, I personally didn't test the game, but I've heard there are a lot of FPS issues, texture popping issues, and the same network issues I described earlier. Now, as I've said, just to be super clear, these are my experiences. Many people have had no problems or very few problems. I highlight these issues though for an important reason. You know how we're all really hard on the way that EA monetizes their games because they have a really shitty track record for in-game monetization? Well, Massive has a really shitty track record for fixing their bugs. It's just a fact. So I think that in this area, it warrants particular scrutiny. The Division was ultimately brought to its knees because of its bugs and its exploits, and I would hate to see the same thing happen this time around. I pray that it doesn't, but I do recommend holding off on a day one purchase of this game until we can be confident that all of these things have been addressed. And speaking of monetization, by the way, I think there's this perception out there that I unfairly hammer Anthem on its monetization and I give Ubisoft a pass. This just isn't true. When the Division first added loot boxes, I spoke out against them, labeling them exploitative. When Far Cry 5 came out, I said I liked it, but I didn't like the fact that it sold weapons and vehicles for cash. I got huge amounts of heat for saying I didn't like the in-game store in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and I fucking hated the XP booster bullshit that made it feel like they wanted me to buy it to avoid the grind. When the Division 2 was announced and they said they'd be pre-selling an annual pass without telling anyone what was in that pass, I called that out in my reveal video as being shitty. When Ubisoft announced that purchasing the Ultimate Edition would net you extra stash slots, I did a dedicated video calling out that bullshit. Ubisoft went on to then reverse that decision in part because of that video. I've said a hell of a lot more about the Division's monetization than I've said about Anthem's, and my concerns about the monetization of Anthem, they aren't specific to Anthem. I apply the same critical lens to all games, especially looters, which are so ripe for exploitative monetization because they have so many complex loot-driven systems that can be carved up and sold off in shitty loot boxes or some other bullshit storefront. So, 5 weeks out from the release of The Division 2, what do we know about its monetization? Well, firstly, we know it's ridiculous. Everyone laughed at Anthem's play early chart, but this chart highlighting the different versions of The Division 2 is a much bigger laugh if you ask me. Speaking of play early, did you know that all of the Division's DLC will be free? Great. But that the annual pass you can purchase will give you early access to it. We know literally nothing else about this annual pass at this point, but you can still buy it if you are foolish enough to pay for something when you have no idea what it is. The cost of the season pass is $30 US, half the price of the game, and they haven't even bothered to tell us what it contains. Let's talk cosmetics. Now we know that Anthem has ruled out any cosmetics that are only available for purchase. They've made very clear that you'll be able to earn them all in-game. The Division 2? No idea. The original game has paid exclusive cosmetics, so I expect the sequel will as well. Loot boxes. Man, we all hate those, don't we? They're the worst. Even EA can see the writing on the wall here, making sure that both Battlefield 5 and Anthem are loot box free. The Division 2? No idea. Probably yes. The Division 1 has loot boxes right now that sell cosmetics. Since Ubisoft have been radio silent on the matter, I expect they'll make a return as well. I mean, we don't even know if we'll be able to buy items that increase player power in the Division 2. I mean, we can do it in Assassin's Creed right now. Will we be able to do it in the Division? No idea. So to summarize worst case scenarios, Anthem has no paid early access to DLC, no paid exclusive cosmetics, no annual pass, no loot boxes, and no pay to win. The Division has already confirmed some of these things, and we have big question marks in place for the others. As worried as I am for Anthem's monetization, I am far more worried about the Division 2. If I were to summarize how I'm feeling about the Division, it's very similar to Anthem. I'm cautiously optimistic. It's different though in that I have more confidence that the Division's endgame will be more fleshed out since it's building on a lot of existing systems from the previous game, and PvP provides something endlessly replayable for those that enjoy it. The technical side though is very worrisome, as is the monetization stuff. But I'm honestly relieved that the Division 2 feels as fleshed out as it does, because I was concerned that the sequel would be a touch phoned in, uninspired, the Division 1.5, etc. Its changes deepen its connection to its tactical core in a way that the original game could never achieve. I think this is important because it makes the game the only tactical looter shooter on the market, one where your moment-to-moment decisions really matter. Like Destiny and Warframe and Anthem, they're about this feeling of unlimited power and movement and flight and just mowing down endless amounts of enemies. The Division is the opposite of that. It's about making the smartest call every second because you're too weak and exposed to throw caution to the wind. The Division sets itself completely apart from its contemporaries, and if it can get through what I expect to be a very rocky launch, I do think it will eventually be a great game. But as I said, be cautious, make sure everything's working, make sure we know what the monetization is. There's still lots of question marks there.